On a quiet night, long after the markets have emptied and the streets of Florence have gone still, a lone candle burns in a small room. The city outside is sleeping, but at a simple wooden table, a man leans over a sheet of paper. His clothes are worn, his hands are ink-stained. Once he served powerful rulers. Now, in exile and disgrace, he writes for a prince who may never even read his words. Yet those words will travel far beyond his own life. They will whisper about power for centuries to come. His name is Niccolò Machiavelli. His book is called The Prince. And tonight it is not a storm of violence or battle we are walking into, but a quiet, steady unfolding of how power moves in the dark. As the candlelight touches his tired face, he is not plotting grand conquests. He is trying to make sense of a harsh world, a world where good men fall, where careful plans are broken by sudden fortune, where kindness can be punished and cruelty can be rewarded. He has watched cities rise and crumble, leaders adored one year and executed the next. Now, as he writes, he is building a kind of secret map, a small playbook for survival in a time when mercy is a luxury and trust is a risk. His words may sound cold, but they are born from wounds, not from ice. If these words carry you closer to sleep, let this channel stay by your side too, like a steady lantern in a long hallway. You can return to it whenever the day has been loud and the world feels sharp. Let this story keep you company as your thoughts soften and your breathing slows. You do not have to agree with Machiavelli. You do not have to admire him. Tonight, you only need to listen, gently, as we walk beside him through his life and his ideas, and let the rhythm of his story guide you toward rest. Night leans gently over Florence, wrapping stone towers and tiled roofs in a soft blue hush. The last sounds of the market have faded. Stalls are empty. The Arno River moves quietly through the city, like a strip of liquid metal, carrying reflections of lanterns and stars. From above, it all seems peaceful, almost fragile, as is the whole city as a child finally asleep after a long and restless day. But beneath that quiet, Florence is not simple. It is a place of beauty and danger, of paintings and plots, of prayers whispered in churches and promises broken in shadowed rooms. It is here that a boy named Niccolò opens his eyes and begins to listen. His house is not a palace. It is modest, with worn chairs, a simple table, shelves of books that smell of dust and old leather. His father is not a mighty lord, but a lawyer with debts and worries, a man who cannot give his son great riches, but can give him something else, stories. On many evenings, while the sky outside burns orange and then fades, Niccolò sits close as his father reads from ancient histories. He hears about Roman generals, clever senators, brave and foolish kings. These names are far away in time, yet they move through his small room like real visitors. The boy leans closer, his fingers wrapped around the edge of the table, and learns that whole nations can rise on a decision made in a single hour. When morning comes, Florence becomes another kind of classroom. Niccolò steps out into streets that are narrow and winding, squeezed between tall stone walls that keep secrets well. Washing hangs from windows, the smell of bread drifts from bakeries. Merchants call out gently, their voices mixing into a low hum. But in between these everyday sounds, there is something else, something more tense. Men stop talking when certain names are mentioned. A glance is held just a little too long. A laugh ends sooner than it should. Even as a boy, he feels that his city wears a mask. It smiles for the world, but behind that smile, it is always watching.
Florence is not ruled by a king sitting on a faraway throne. It is a republic, proud of its freedom, run by councils and votes, by men whose power rests not in crowns, but in money, family ties, and sharp minds. Above the roofs, tall towers mark the homes of famous families, stones reaching upward like raised fists. Among them, One name rings louder than the rest: the Medici. They are bankers, rich beyond measure, lending money to popes and princes, moving gold through Europe like blood through a body. Some say they are friends of the city. Others say they hold Florence by the throat, quietly, under the table. Young Niccolò hears their name in almost every conversation, the way you might hear the weather spoken about, always present, always affecting everything. The city is brilliant. Painters are mixing colors no one has seen before. Sculptors are carving marble into living flesh. Architects are lifting domes that seem to float on air. Priests chant in candlelit churches, and philosophers argue about the soul and the stars. But Florence is also fragile. It is surrounded by rivals and enemies. It is pulled into the struggles of larger powers, kingdoms and empires that are always hungry for land and gold. Inside its walls, factions fight quietly for control. Sometimes they shout in the open. Sometimes they whisper through locked doors. Every citizen, even a child, knows that the peace of one year does not guarantee the peace of the next. Niccolò grows in this world like a tree rooted in rocky soil. He's not towering or imposing. He is serious, clever, always watching. At the table, he reads. In the streets, he listens. He learns Latin so he can speak with the dead, so he can hear the advice of ancient writers in their own voices. He sees how the stories from history echo in his own time. A cautious general from Rome looks like a careful banker in Florence. A proud emperor sounds like a loud merchant on a street corner. He begins to understand that underneath the changing clothes of each century, human nature remains strangely the same.
Years pass, and the city's mask shifts again. In 1494, when Niccolò is in his mid-20s, rumors flow through Florence like cold wind. A French king, Charles VIII, is marching down into Italy with an army at his back. The ground seems to tremble with the news. As the French draw closer, so does fear. The Medici, who have held Florence in their soft, heavy hands for decades, find their grip slipping. Crowds gather, voices rise. Some call for freedom, some call for faith. The balance breaks. The Medici are driven out. The old order falls like a curtain at the end of a long, tense play. In their place steps a new, strange figure, a Dominican friar named Savonarola. He speaks with fierce fire about sin and corruption. He warns of God's anger. He dreams of a pure city, stripped of its pride, devoted only to holy living. Under his influence, Florence changes its clothes once more. Bright dresses, playing cards, and certain books are thrown into great bonfires. The people call it a cleansing. For some, it is a relief. For others, it feels like losing a part of themselves. Niccolò watches all this, the rise of a holy ruler born from chaos. He sees how quickly power can change its face, from smiling banker to burning prophet, and how the crowd that cheered one leader can just as easily cheer another. Yet even this fierce spiritual power does not last. Savonarola's enemies grow bolder. His visions are questioned. His influence cracks. Soon the city is ready for another change, another experiment. Out of all this confusion, a new republic is born, more balanced, more careful, trying to learn from what has come before. It wants to protect Florence from chaos without slipping into tyranny. It needs people who can write, organize, negotiate, and keep the delicate machinery of government turning. In the quiet space that opens here, Niccolò finds his path. In 1498, Niccolò Machiavelli is given a role in the Florentine government. It is not a throne, not a grand title that would make crowds shout his name, but it is important all the same. He is appointed as a secretary in the chancery, where letters are written, decisions are recorded, and the voice of Florence is shaped into words and sent out across Italy and beyond. To someone passing him in the corridor, he might look like just another clerk with ink on his fingers. But for Niccolò, this is the doorway he has been waiting for, a way into the hidden heart of power. His days become long and full. He wakes early, the sky still pale and empty, and walks through streets that are beginning to stir. At the government offices, he sits at a desk covered in papers and seals. He writes and rewrites letters to ambassadors and allies, to generals and neighboring states. Each word is chosen like a tool. One phrase may soothe, another may threaten without saying so openly. Behind every message lies a question: how do we protect Florence in a world where promises are fragile and swords are quick? He is sent on missions, too, away from the soft light of his own city. He travels to courts full of glittering clothes and careful smiles, where every gesture is a performance. In France, he stands before King Louis XII, watching how a vast kingdom moves at the will of one man. In other places, he meets cardinals, nobles, and diplomats, each one a piece on a board he is slowly learning how to read. He notes who hesitates before speaking, who interrupts, who flatters, who threatens. All of it becomes material for the quiet book he is writing in his mind, even if no page has been touched yet. When he returns home from these journeys, he carries stories back with him like sand in his shoes. He has seen armies that can crush small states in a single season. He has met rulers whose charm is as dangerous as their soldiers. Slowly, his early belief in clean, simple goodness as the foundation of good government begins to stretch. He still loves Florence. He still hopes for a republic that is free and fair, but he cannot ignore what he has seen, that the world outside does not always reward pure intentions. Sometimes it rewards speed, strength, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. Yet he does not turn into a cynic overnight. Many evenings, after the work of the day is done, he returns to his books. He reads Livy's stories of Rome, of a people who built a republic out of resistance to kings. He reads about struggle and compromise, about how a state can be strong not because it is ruled by a single iron hand, but because its citizens are active, proud, and prepared for war when needed. These ideas stir something in him. He dreams of a Florence that is not simply surviving between larger powers, but shaping its own fate with courage and discipline. He studies not just great leaders, but ordinary soldiers. He dislikes the reliance on foreign mercenaries, men who fight for money rather than for love of their home. To him, it feels like handing your heartbeat to a stranger. He begins to imagine a militia made of Florentines, citizens who will defend their own walls. In this hope, you can still see the young man who grew up on stories of the Roman Republic, who wants power to serve the common good, not just a few rich families. As the years pass, Niccolò rises in responsibility. He becomes second chancellor, a position that gives him more influence, more access to secrets, more chances to watch how decisions are really made. He is not the face of Florence, but he is one of its important voices, shaping its letters, guiding its envoys, advising its leaders. People who once barely noticed him now know his name. In official halls, his footsteps are familiar. When questions arise about diplomacy or defense, someone will say, "Ask Machiavelli what he thinks." Around him, Florence continues its restless dance. The Medici remain in exile, but their memory is not gone. They still send messages, still weave threads in the distance, still dream of returning. The great powers of Europe shift and argue. New threats appear and old ones change shape. In this constant movement, Niccolò stands like a man on a small bridge trying to read the currents of a fast river. He feels the weight of his city's trust. He also senses somewhere deep and quiet that no one stands at such a bridge forever. On some nights, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, he steps outside into the cool air and lets the city's sounds wash over him. Laughter from a tavern, a cart rolling slowly on uneven stones, a distant song rising above the rooftops. He breathes it all in and feels a simple, human contentment. He is serving the place that shaped him. He is useful. He is needed. The young boy who once watched from the edge of the stage now walks among the actors, part of the play. But if you could freeze that moment and walk around it, if you could look at it from above,
you would see something he cannot. You would see, at the edge of the map, dark clouds beginning to form. You would see the Medici gathering strength and allies. You would see decisions being made in distant rooms that will, sooner than anyone expects, sweep through Florence like a sudden wind through a narrow street. For now, though, Niccolò does not see these details. He knows that politics is always uncertain, that fortune can turn, but he does not yet feel how near that turn has come. So we leave him there for a moment, standing in the soft Florentine night. Behind him lie years of learning, a childhood in a city of masks, a youth spent listening and reading, and a steady climb into the heart of public life. Before him lies a future he cannot read, disgrace, exile, and the quiet desk where he will write the work that will make his name live far beyond these streets. Between these two worlds, he stands balanced on a thin line of time, unaware that the ground beneath him is already beginning, very gently, to shift. The change, when it finally came, did not arrive with a loud warning. It crept toward Florence the way evening shadows creep along a wall, slow and certain, until suddenly the light is gone. Niccolò Machiavelli, still busy with papers and letters, still walking the halls of government with steady steps, did not know which meeting would be his last as an official servant of the Republic. To him, the days must have felt like a familiar pattern. There were embassies to arrange, soldiers to discuss, alliances to weigh. The rhythm of duty wrapped around him like a cloak. Yet far beyond his office, a different rhythm was building, one that beat to the march of the returning Medici.
The balance that had held Florence for years began to tilt. Old friends of the Medici whispered with new confidence. Allies shifted, as they so often do, toward the side that seemed likely to win. Outside the city, foreign troops moved like a distant storm. Inside, those who remembered the soft but heavy hand of Medici rule dared to imagine that it would soon return. The republic that Niccolò had served so faithfully did not collapse in a single shout. It sagged, slowly, under pressure, until one day the truth could no longer be ignored. The old family was coming home. For Niccolò, there was no simple way to step aside. He had been too visible, too involved, too much a symbol of the republic that had pushed the Medici out. When power changed direction, he stood in clear view of its path. The city that had once felt like a living body to him, full of promise, now felt tense and watchful. Doors closed more quickly, conversations quieted when he drew near. His name, once called in busy hallways, began to sound different on people's tongues, edged with caution. Then the day arrived when the caution turned into action. Machiavelli was removed from office. The authority he had carried in his ink-stained hands was taken from him in a stroke. The familiar desk, the letters, the seal of the Republic, all of it passed to other fingers. For a moment, he must have stood in the empty space left behind, like a man who has stepped off a stage and realizes that the applause has stopped. The work he had given his adult life to, the public service that had shaped his mornings and evenings, was no longer his. But the fall did not stop at simple dismissal. Suspicion in times of change is like a fire in dry grass. Once lit, it spreads faster than anyone expects. The new rulers feared plots and hidden enemies. They looked back at the men who had served the old republic and wondered who among them might be planning a quiet return to power. Niccolò, with his long experience, his many contacts, and his sharp mind, was an easy target for such fears. He was accused of conspiracy, whether justly or not, and there was little goodwill left to protect him. He was arrested. The rooms he knew were replaced by others that smelled of damp stone and anxiety. The questions came, again and again, from men who now held the power he had once helped to guide. They wanted names, confessions, proof. In that dark stretch of his life, pain and fear were close companions. In some accounts, he is put to torture, his body made to carry the same strain his mind had long borne in silence. Yet even here, in this hard place, he did not break into the neat traitor they might have wished him to be.
It is difficult to linger on this part of his story without feeling a tightness in the chest. A man who once spoke to kings and ambassadors is reduced to waiting for footsteps in a corridor, wondering whether the next door that opens will bring release or more suffering. But even in this, there is a quiet thread of survival. The same mind that once watched shifting alliances and dangerous courts now has only one task: endure. And somehow, after enough time has trickled past, the storm around him calms. The Medici no longer need to prove a point with his blood. He is released, not back to his old office, but out into a different kind of prison. Exile, for Machiavelli, does not look like a barren island or a far foreign land. It looks like the countryside just beyond the life he once knew. He withdraws to a small property in Sant'Andrea, a village tucked among the gentle Tuscan hills. The city's stone towers drop away behind him. In their place rise olive trees, low walls, fields that change color with the seasons. The air is quieter here. Instead of the murmur of councils and the clatter of horses, there is birdsong and the distant sound of farm tools striking earth. It might seem peaceful, and in many ways it is, but for a man who thrived on the heartbeat of politics, it is also deeply lonely. His house is simple. The floors are rough, the furniture is plain. There is no steady stream of visitors, no chorus of voices debating the fate of nations. In the mornings, he deals with small, practical matters, disputes over land, quarrels with neighbors, the dull work of keeping a modest estate in order. He writes letters about sick livestock, about money that is owed, about little tensions in the village. For someone who once discussed the movements of kings, these concerns must feel painfully small, like trying to breathe deeply in a room with low ceilings. Yet even in this reduced life, he does not entirely lose himself. There are evenings, described in a letter to a friend, when he changes his clothes at dusk. After a day spent in worn, dusty garments, he washes and puts on finer robes, not for guests, but for the company he is about to keep. In those hours, he leaves behind the world of the fields and enters a different realm, one built from words and memory. He opens his books, the works of ancient historians and philosophers, and he reads.
As he reads, the small farmhouse in Sant'Andrea falls away. The room fills instead with Roman consuls, Greek thinkers, long-dead leaders whose choices still echo centuries later. Machiavelli writes that he speaks with them, that he asks them questions, that they answer with the stories they left behind. It is not a loud conversation, but a deep, inward one. He is no longer a dismissed secretary of a defeated republic. In those hours, he is once again a student at the feet of time itself, learning how human beings have chased and held power across ages. These nightly visits to the past do more than comfort him. They sharpen something inside him that had not gone dull, only quiet. He begins to compare his own experiences in office with the patterns he finds in older stories. He notices how often fortune lifts a man, only to drop him. He sees how success often belongs not to the kindest ruler, but to the one who best understands the game he is playing. He looks back at Florence, at the Medici, at foreign kings, and he feels with growing clarity that there is a kind of hidden code behind the movements of power. Day after day, the outer shape of his life remains the same. He rises, he deals with routine matters, he exchanges jokes with peasants at a local tavern, trying to keep his spirits from sinking. The years of activity in Florence seem far away now, like a dream he once had. But within him, something is changing. The disappointment of exile is slowly being turned into material, the way a rough stone can be turned in the hand until its shape becomes clear. He also feels very keenly his own need. He wants to return to public life. He longs for work that matches the weight of his mind. He knows that the Medici now hold Florence, and he understands that to serve again, he must in some way reach them, impress them, show them his value.
Yet he also knows that if he walks straight to their door and knocks with nothing to offer but his name and his past service to their enemies, he may be turned away. And so, in the quiet of his exile, the idea begins to grow. He will write something, not a simple note, not just another letter, but a gift.
The gift he imagines is not wrapped in silk or gold. It is made of pages. It will be small enough to hold, but sharp enough, he hopes, to cut through the distance between himself and power. He begins to think of a book that would tell a prince what he has learned about rule, not in soft, flattering language, but in the hardest, clearest words he can find. A book that looks at the world not as it ought to be, but as it is. A book that says, in its own way, I see how this works. I can help you survive it. So, one day, after all the slow preparation inside him, he sits down at his desk with a more focused purpose. The same ink that once poured into state documents now flows into something more personal, yet meant for a greater stage. The candlelight reflects on his face as he bends over the first pages. He begins to set down, bit by bit, the thoughts that have been gathering in him since his days in Florence, now sharpened by the cold air of exile. The book he starts will come to be known simply as The Prince. It is important to understand the mood in which he writes. He is not a man at the height of his power, playing cruel games for his own amusement. He is a man who has lost almost everything that once gave his life meaning, except his mind. The Prince is, in many ways, both a job application and a confession. In it, he offers his insight to the Medici, hoping they will see his value and bring him back to the city. At the same time, he allows his clear, sometimes painful view of politics to rise fully to the surface. In exile, he no longer has to protect anyone's feelings in government. He can say what he truly believes about how rulers keep their thrones. The pages that emerge are not gentle. They do not praise mercy for its own sake or promise that honesty will always be rewarded. They talk about fear and love, about cruelty and necessity, about the usefulness of breaking a promise when keeping it would lead to ruin. They examine history's winners and losers with the cool eye of a doctor studying an illness. But if you look closely, you can still see, beneath the hard advice, a sort of wounded hope. Machiavelli has not stopped caring about Italy, about Florence, about the possibility of a stable, strong state. He has only stopped pretending that such a state can be built on wishful thinking alone.
Night after night, the work goes on. Outside, the wind moves softly across the fields. Inside, his pen scratches steadily, a small sound in the quiet room. Sometimes he must feel a flicker of doubt. Will anyone read this? Will the powerful men in Florence see the value in what he offers, or will they be offended by its bluntness? His exile has given him the freedom to be honest, but honesty, he knows, is dangerous when it exposes how things really work. Yet he continues. In the rhythm of his writing, he finds a new kind of service. He is no longer drafting letters on behalf of a living republic, but he is still, in his way, working for the idea of a stronger, more realistic politics. The Prince becomes his way of remaining in conversation with power, even when power has turned its back on him. It keeps him from sinking fully into despair, because through it he can still imagine a role for himself in the larger story. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the breathing of those long nights. A man alone with his thoughts, the world outside his windows dim and quiet, shaping words that will travel farther than any diplomatic mission he ever undertook. There is something gently haunting about it, but also calming. It reminds us that even when a door has closed loudly behind us, there may still be a window of purpose open somewhere in the dark. In exile, Machiavelli lost his titles, his influence, and much of his daily dignity. But in exile, too, he found the stillness in which a different kind of power could be born. The Prince is not a kind book, but it is an honest one, drawn from a mind that has walked through hope, service, humiliation, and reflection. By the time he sets down his pen, the small farmhouse in Sant'Andrea has become, for a while, the center of a quiet revolution in political thought. He cannot know what will happen next. He cannot see how some future readers will curse his name and others will praise his clarity. He cannot imagine classrooms and offices centuries later where people will argue about whether he was a teacher of evil or simply a clear-eyed observer of it. All he knows in that moment is that he has taken his fall and turned it into something sharp and precise, something that might yet open a door.
And so, as another night folds itself over the Tuscan hills, Niccolò Machiavelli blows out his candle and rests. The Prince lies on his table, just ink on paper for now, waiting. Outside, the world of rulers and battles continues to move in its restless way. Inside, in the dark, a new chapter of his life and of our understanding of power has already begun, even if he does not yet feel its weight. By the time the first copies of his thoughts begin to settle onto pages, the world inside the Prince is already forming into shape. It is not a gentle garden. It is a hard landscape where danger is never far, where a ruler walks a narrow bridge with deep drops on either side. Yet Machiavelli does not write about this world with wild anger or loud judgment. He writes with the slow, careful tone of someone who has watched people all his life and finally sits down to say, "This is what I have seen." The candle beside him burns low. The house is quiet. Somewhere in those hours, he turns toward a question that has followed rulers for centuries, a question that reaches from palaces to bedrooms, from kings to parents and teachers, and anyone who has ever had to lead. Is it better to be loved or feared? He does not rush into the answer. He circles it first, like someone walking around a fire feeling its heat from different sides. He thinks about kinds of love that rulers inspire, the soft loyalty born from kindness, the devotion that grows when a leader protects his people, the warmth that rises in hearts when they feel truly seen and safe. He has known that feeling himself in small ways, the love of a city for a republic that gave it a voice, the pride citizens feel when they believe their rulers are honest. Love, he knows, can be strong. It can make men endure hunger and hardship, can carry them into battle with courage because they fight not only for themselves, but for someone they trust. But he has also seen how fragile love can be when fear enters the room. He has watched crowds turn quickly when fortune shifts. The same voices that once cheered a leader in the square can whisper against him when food grows scarce, when enemies surround the city, when rumors of weakness spread through taverns. Love, he sees, is tied to hope. When people believe that their ruler can still protect them, love stays close. When they doubt, it slips away, as if someone had quietly opened a door in the night and it had walked out without a sound. These memories sit with him as he writes, not like cold facts, but like small, old pains.
Fear, in his view, works differently. It does not glow the way love does. It does not sing or smile. It sits heavy in the stomach. It tightens the breath. It makes a person think twice before acting against the one who inspires it. Machiavelli has seen how soldiers obey a commander they fear more than the enemy ahead of them. He has seen how thieves change their path when they know the punishment will be swift and certain. Fear, he decides, is cruel but more stable. It does not depend on good weather or good fortune. It lives even when the sky is dark. So when he finally answers his own question, he does it with the steady hand of someone who has chosen clarity over comfort. If a ruler cannot be both loved and feared, he writes, it is safer to be feared. Safer, not nicer. Safer, not kinder. He does not pretend that this is beautiful. He treats it as a hard truth,
like a doctor telling a patient that a bitter medicine must be taken if they wish to survive. His words land with a quiet heaviness, the way a stone drops into still water. Yet even as he writes this, the man behind the ink is not made of ice. He is not telling a bedtime story about monsters. He is describing what he believes he has learned from watching real men in real danger. To him, the ruler is not living in a peaceful world where gentle choices always lead to gentle outcomes. The ruler is standing at the edge of a cliff with a storm behind him, trying to keep a whole country from falling. In that storm, Machiavelli believes that fear is a more reliable rope than love. It may cut the hands that hold it, but it does not snap as easily. To understand him, we have to remember what Italy looked like through his eyes. The peninsula was not one calm, united land. It was a patchwork of city-states, kingdoms, and territories, each with its own ruler, its own soldiers, its own fears. Foreign powers moved across it like large animals through tall grass. In such a place, hesitation could mean invasion. Mercy could be read as weakness. A prince who waited too long to act might not live long enough to regret it. Machiavelli's heart still longed for a strong, free Italy, but his mind refused to draw that Italy in soft lines that ignored the risks. From this same place of hard love for his country, he begins to reshape the meaning of a word that many people think they understand: virtue. In everyday life, virtue usually means goodness in a simple sense: honesty, kindness, patience, the gentle qualities admired by parents and priests. Machiavelli respects these in private life, but when he writes about rulers, he gives the word a new weight. For him, virtù is not about being nice, it is about strength, skill, courage, the ability to make difficult choices at exactly the right moment.
He thinks of virtù as a kind of inner sharpness. A prince with virtù can read the times, sense danger before it fully appears, and act with speed and force when needed. He does not drift along, hoping things will improve on their own. He moves. Sometimes that movement is beautiful and generous. Sometimes it is harsh and bloody. Machiavelli does not celebrate the ugliness, but he does not look away from it either. To him, a ruler who clings to simple goodness while his enemies sharpen their knives is not virtuous, he is naive, and naive rulers, he believes, do not stay rulers for long. You can almost feel the tension inside him as he writes these lines. On one side, there is the human wish for a world where being good is enough. On the other side, there is the long list of names of men who tried to rule gently and lost their thrones, their cities, and sometimes their lives. He has watched merciful leaders fall before ruthless ones. He has seen promises made in faith broken by those who never meant to keep them. He has learned the hard way that in politics, other players do not always follow the rules you wish they would. Machiavelli does not undo the idea of goodness, he moves it. In his thought, goodness is found not only in kind actions, but also in effective ones. A prince who is too soft and lets his state be destroyed, in his eyes, has failed his people more deeply than a prince who uses harsh measures to prevent chaos and war. Cruelty, when used carefully and rarely to secure peace, seems to him less wicked than a gentle hand that allows endless disorder. It is a painful, upside-down way of thinking for those of us who wish for simpler answers, but he is not writing from a safe, quiet country. He is writing from a land that has seen armies pass like storms and governments change like seasons. To explain what he means, he fills his thoughts with examples. He looks back at rulers who acted decisively, even violently, in the early days of their rule. They used cruelty like a single flame to burn away the most dangerous threats quickly, then let the fire die. After that, they governed more calmly. The fear they had planted early kept future rebellions from growing, and over time, their people enjoyed a more steady peace. This, he argues, is a kind of dark mercy, a short, sharp hurt to avoid a longer, deeper one. He contrasts this with rulers who commit small acts of cruelty again and again, like someone who keeps scratching the same wound. These princes never let fear settle into a stable shape. Their subjects grow restless, angry, and ready to revolt. In such a case, Machiavelli says, the cruelty is not only wrong, but also foolish. It does not protect the prince, it weakens him. Even his harshest advice, then, still carries inside it a lesson about restraint and timing. He does not tell rulers to be cruel for pleasure. He tells them that if they choose hard measures, they must choose them only when truly needed and with a careful hand. This cool way of dividing actions into useful and harmful, rather than simply calling them good or evil, can feel chilling at first. It is like listening to a surgeon describe a dangerous operation in calm, precise words. But if we listen more quietly, we can hear another note beneath the surface. Machiavelli is not praising cruelty because he loves it. He is trying to face a world in which harm will happen no matter what. And in that world, he wishes harm to be controlled, limited, and directed toward preventing greater suffering. Still, his trust in fear over love and in harsh necessity over sweet ideals has a cost. Many readers, even long after his death, will feel wounded by his words. They will look around at their own leaders and fear what might happen if those leaders follow the prince like a strict rulebook. Some will call Machiavelli a teacher of evil. Others will respond that he is only describing what powerful people already do in secret. Between these two reactions lies a deep, uneasy space, and in that space, his ideas continue to stir. As you lie here listening, you might feel that unease too. There is something inside most of us that wants to believe the best about those who lead. We would like to think that love is stronger than fear, that the kind ruler will always triumph over the cruel one. Machiavelli refuses to give us that comfort. He says, in essence, that the world we live in does not always reward gentle hearts at the top. He does not say this to punish our hope, but to force us to see the dangers that hope alone cannot defend us from. In quiet moments, though, it is worth remembering that Machiavelli's view, while sharp, is not the only one. His words sit at one end of a long line of thought about power. At another end sit men and women who believe that kindness, honesty, and trust can build strong nations too. The truth of human life may lie somewhere between these poles. Even Machiavelli, for all his hardness, praises certain forms of generosity and keeping faith when they do not threaten a ruler's survival. He is not against goodness, he is against helplessness. In the soft half-light of his little study, with the prince spreading across the table before him, he continues to shape this careful, uneasy balance. He tells princes that they should, whenever possible, seek to be both loved and feared, but that if they must choose, they must choose fear. He urges them to avoid being hated. Hatred, he knows, can drive people to desperate acts. He tells them to avoid touching their subjects' property and families, because these are the deepest roots of resentment. Even in his harshness, there are lines he advises rulers not to cross. His thoughts on fear and love are not just about feelings. They are about how to hold power in a world that will always test it. He believes that a ruler must be ready to act against kindness, against faith, against religion itself when survival demands it. This is perhaps the coldest edge of his teaching. Yet he adds another whisper alongside it. A ruler who does this must still appear to be gentle, faithful, and devout. The people must see the mask, even if they never see the face behind it. Power, he knows, rests not only on force, but on stories people tell themselves about who their leader is. That thought leads him, slowly and naturally, toward the next part of his reflections. If a prince must be prepared to act one way and seem another, then appearance becomes its own kind of weapon, as real as any army. A ruler must learn not only how to act, but how to look. He must learn how to be a lion when strength is needed, and a fox when cleverness will do more than claws. In this theater of rule, the stage, the costume, and the script all matter as much as the ruler's actual heart. For now, though, in this chapter of his life and thought, we leave him sitting with the hard truth that fear, in his eyes, is safer than love, and that virtue in politics must sometimes wear armor instead of soft robes. It is an unsettling place to rest, but also a deeply human one. It shows us a man trying to save something he cares about by looking at it without illusions. It invites us, gently, to think about our own lives as well.
In the small kingdoms we each rule, our families, our classrooms, our teams, how do we balance kindness and strength? How do we stay open-hearted without being broken by those who are not?
The candle on his table burns lower as he writes these last lines about fear and love. Outside, the night stretches over the Tuscan fields. Inside, his pen pauses. The question of what a ruler must be is not yet finished in his mind. There is still another layer to explore, one that slips like a shadow between truth and performance. As he lifts his eyes from the page, he is already turning his thoughts toward it. If power must live in the minds of people as much as in the hands of a prince, then the art of appearing, of playing both fox and lion, will be his next quiet subject. Night has a way of softening even the hardest ideas. As the hours grow late around Machiavelli's small country house, the sharp edges of fear and necessity that he has been writing about begin to blur at the corners. The candle by his elbow burns with a quiet, steady flame. From somewhere outside comes the distant sound of a dog, then silence again. Inside that hush, another thought rises in him, as gentle and insistent as a tide. It is not enough, he realizes, for a ruler to be strong or clever in private. Power does not live only in decisions made behind closed doors. Power lives in the minds of people, and the mind is moved not just by truth, but by images. He reaches for a simple picture to explain this, something even a child could understand. He finds it in the old language of beasts. A prince, he writes, must learn to fight with the strength of a lion and the cunning of a fox. The lion can scare off wolves with a single roar, but he cannot see traps laid in his path. The fox, small and quick, can smell danger in the slightest bend of a twig, but he cannot frighten away the hunters on his own. To survive, a ruler must borrow from both, shifting as the world demands, sometimes showing teeth, sometimes slipping through shadows. These animals do not belong to the quiet Tuscan hills outside his window. They belong to a forest in his mind, a dark, tangled place where threats are always nearby. In that forest, the prince walks like a hunter and hunted at once. When enemies gather openly, he must be lion, bold and unmistakable. When dangers lurk in smiling faces and flattering words, he must be fox, pretending not to see while noticing everything. Machiavelli sets these images on the page with slow care, knowing they will stay with readers long after the exact sentences have faded. As he writes about the fox and the lion, certain memories must rise to meet the ink. Among them is the figure of Cesare Borgia, one of the most dangerous men he ever observed up close. Years before, as a diplomat from Florence, Machiavelli had stood in Borgia's courts, watching him move through rooms crowded with soldiers, priests, and supplicants. Borgia's smile was warm, his manners polished, yet around him decisions were made that turned on betrayal and sudden death. He could charm an ally in the morning and sign that same ally's doom before the sun had set.
Machiavelli did not admire Borgia's cruelty, but he could not deny his skill. Here was a man who understood how to appear generous while preparing a trap, who knew when to strike hard and when to wait, watching his enemies weaken themselves. Borgia was a lion when he rode through conquered towns in shining armor. He was fox when he divided his foes, offering them peace with one hand while tightening a noose with the other. In the quiet of exile, Machiavelli takes these memories and distills them, not to praise the man, but to show how dangerous and effective such a mixture can be. If that sounds sharp, let your thoughts soften around it for a moment. You are hearing not a celebration of darkness, but a tired observer trying to explain how the game was actually played before his eyes. He has seen gentlemen destroyed for assuming others played by kinder rules. He has no wish for you to become like Borgia. He only wants you to understand how someone like Borgia holds on to power in a vicious world. From animals, Machiavelli's mind turns naturally to masks. It is not enough, he says, for a prince to possess certain qualities. He must, above all, appear to possess them. The list he gives is almost comforting at first. A ruler should seem merciful, faithful, humane, honest, religious. These are the very traits most people would wish for in a leader. They are the virtues mothers hope for their sons, priests commend from their pulpits, teachers praise in their students. But then, gently and without raising his voice, he adds the unsettling part. A prince must be ready to act against those virtues when necessity demands it. He must be prepared to break faith, to hide his true intentions, to move in ways that do not match his public image. Yet even then, he must hold that image firmly in place. The people, he tells us, judge more by what they see than by what they cannot see. Appearances become a kind of armor. The prince who wears them well can move through storms more safely than the one who shows his true face in every moment.
To explain this, Machiavelli does not leap into wild theory. He draws instead on the world he has walked through. He has seen rulers attend mass with bowed heads, lips moving in prayer, even as they plan harsh campaigns in the quiet after the service. He has watched a prince stand before his people in simple clothes, speaking of sacrifice and common struggle, while knowing that behind the scenes, careful deals have been struck to protect his own wealth. The ceremonies, the clothes, the words, all of these form a stage on which power performs its role. Imagine for a moment one of those ceremonies, a grand hall lit by high windows and flickering candles, walls covered in tapestries bright with scenes of saints and battles. A ruler enters, robe trailing, soldiers and courtiers standing respectfully aside. Music plays as he steps to a raised platform. He lifts his hands and the room quiets. His voice, smooth and practiced, speaks of justice, of peace, of duty. For many who listen, these words are not lies. They are a promise they long to believe. Few will ever see the private letters that may contradict them. Machiavelli has stood in such rooms and felt the pull of that promise himself. He is not immune to beauty or to hope. But as he writes The Prince, he chooses to look at these scenes from another angle. What does the ruler gain by speaking this way? What effect does this display have on his subjects, his allies, his enemies? How does the story he tells about himself help him hold power, even when his actions do not always match it? In asking these questions, he peels back the painted surface of politics to show the plain wood beneath. There is a risk in seeing the world this way. Once you start to notice masks, you may begin to see them everywhere. Yet Machiavelli, in his calm, quiet style, is not saying that all goodness is false. He is saying that in politics, goodness and its appearance are often separated, and that wise rulers learn to manage both. A prince who does cruel things and looks cruel will soon be hated and perhaps killed. A prince who does necessary harsh things but looks merciful may be forgiven, even admired, if he maintains peace and order. The actions and the performance must be woven together with care.
In the soft dark of his study, he writes about reputation as if it were a fragile, living thing. A ruler's fame, he says, can protect him more than high walls. If he is known as decisive, enemies will think twice before attacking. If he is known as generous when times allow, his people will endure harder days more patiently. But if he is known as weak, indecisive, or inconsistent, then even his kindness will not save him when storms gather. Reputation is a lamp carried ahead of a prince. It lights the path he has not yet walked. Sometimes Machiavelli's pen grows a little sharper when he thinks of those who cling too closely to keeping their hands visibly clean. A ruler who refuses ever to deceive, ever to punish harshly, ever to hide his intentions, may be noble in heart, but short-lived in office. Machiavelli cannot bring himself to praise such a man as a model for princes, because he has seen what happens to states when their leaders are too fragile for the world they inhabit. His love for stability outweighs his love for pure public virtue. It is a choice that will make many readers uneasy, and he seems to accept that unease as part of his legacy. And yet, even here, he does not advise abandoning all goodness. He urges moderation in cruelty, restraint in taking property, care in touching people's families and beliefs. He tells princes that being hated is more dangerous than being feared. He knows that masks can crack under too much strain. A ruler who constantly offends his people's deepest feelings will find his image shattered, and with it his safety. The fox and the lion, the mask and the face, must all be held in delicate balance. As you listen, you may find your thoughts drifting away from Renaissance courts to places closer to your own life. You might think about leaders on screens, their voices shaped by careful speechwriters, their images polished by lenses and lights. You might think of how people curate their lives on social media, showing the brightest angles while hiding the rest. In a quiet way, Machiavelli's thoughts on appearance reach far beyond princes. They brush against the daily performances we all give, the small masks we wear to seem more confident, more kind, more certain than we sometimes feel inside.
It can be a heavy realization that so much of human life is theater, but in the calm rhythm of his writing, there is also a kind of comfort. If we know that appearances matter, we are less likely to be fooled by them. We can admire what is beautiful without worshiping it. We can question what we see without sliding into endless suspicion. We can forgive ourselves, too, for the ways we present different faces in different rooms, understanding that some of this is simply how social life works. Machiavelli, in his own life, has known this double existence well. As a government official, he once wrote letters that presented Florence as united, strong, and wise, even when he knew its leaders were arguing fiercely behind closed doors. He crafted careful messages to foreign courts, promising steadiness when the ground at home was shaking. Now, in exile, that outer mask has been stripped away. He is no longer the voice of a city. He is a dismissed servant in worn clothes, playing cards with villagers by day and conversing with ancient authors by night. Perhaps it is this stripping away that allows him to write so honestly about masks. Having lost his own public role, he can see more clearly how fragile such roles are. He has lived on both sides of the curtain, on the stage, speaking for the state, and in the wings, watching others perform their power. The prince becomes, among other things, his record of what he saw from both vantage points. It is as if he is saying to his readers, softly, do not be too dazzled by what is shown to you. Look also at what must be done behind the scenes to keep the show running. Still, he knows that even this book will be its own kind of appearance. He shapes it as a gift to the Medici, hoping they will read it and see not a bitter exile, but a useful mind. He chooses his examples, his tone, his dedication with care, like a craftsman polishing a mirror he hopes will be admired. In writing about masks, he is also putting on a new one, that of the wise counselor, the man who understands power so deeply that princes would be foolish not to use him. There is a gentle irony in this, one that he may or may not fully feel. The man who has lost his place in the theater of Florentine politics is now building a different stage, one that exists in words. On that stage, he places his prince, his fox and lion, his masks and ceremonies. He controls the lights and the angles. He invites future rulers to step into the part he has written for them. Whether they accept or not, his script is ready, waiting.
As the candle burns lower, his thoughts begin to stretch beyond his own lifetime in a quiet, unspoken way. If a prince learns to use appearances as he advises, perhaps his state will survive longer than those that rely only on honest intentions. If readers learn to see through certain shows, perhaps they will be less easily misled. He cannot know how his work will be received, but he senses that he has touched something deep and lasting in the nature of power. Outside, the night thickens over the fields and the distant city. Inside, the ink on his pages dries. He has written now about fear and love, about virtue as strength, about the art of seeming one thing while sometimes being another. The world of the prince is nearly complete, its hard lines drawn in a steady, unshaking hand. Soon, those lines will leave this quiet room and begin a life of their own. And that is where another story begins, one that Machiavelli will not live to see in full.
The long journey of his book through the centuries, the praises and condemnations, the whispers in royal courts, the bans from church lists, the way his own name will become a kind of mask others place on him. In the next turning of our tale, we will follow that journey gently, watching how a small, sharp book written in exile casts a shadow far longer than its author's years. When the writing is done and the pages are dry, there is no thunderclap. No royal messenger gallops up to Machiavelli's little house to thank him. No bells ring in Florence. The prince sits quietly on a desk in a countryside room, just a stack of paper bound by hope. Outside, the hills are the same soft shapes they were before. The olive trees do not know that anything has changed. And in a way, nothing has, not yet. The man who wrote this hard little book is still in exile, still a dismissed servant with rough hands and worn clothes. He has given his thoughts their sharpest form. Now he must live with the silence that follows. He sends his work toward the Medici like a bottle set adrift in a restless sea. In his dedication, he bends, just a little, toward flattery. He presents himself as someone who has watched power closely, who has something useful to say about how it can be held. Underneath every line lies the same quiet plea: see me, use me, bring me back. For Machiavelli, the prince is not a cold monument to cruelty. It is a bridge he hopes will lead him from the rough dirt of Sant'Andrea back to the polished floors of government offices. But history, like fortune, does not always move as a man wishes. There is no grand reinstatement, no triumphant return. Some of his letters bring small tasks, faint signals that he has not been totally forgotten. But the life he once had in the heart of Florentine politics never truly opens to him again. The days still begin with simple duties, still pass through card games and local quarrels, still end with books and quiet reflection. The prince remains, for the time being, a narrow beam of thought thrown into a very wide darkness. Eventually, as all candles do, his own light begins to fade. The years weigh more heavily on him. The world he once moved through with alert eyes now feels a little distant, as if it belonged to someone he used to know. When Niccolò Machiavelli dies in 1527, it is without the comfort of knowing what his book will become. He leaves the world much as he had lived in it at the end, thoughtful, wounded, full of sharp insight and unfinished hopes. The city he loved is still entangled in its struggles. Italy is still divided. The dream of a strong, united homeland remains just that, a dream. For a time, The Prince is only another manuscript among many. It passes from hand to hand, sometimes copied, sometimes set aside. It is not yet the famous, feared text it will later be. It moves quietly, slipping through the spaces of a Europe that is busy with wars, reforms, and changes of its own. But good or bad, powerful ideas have a way of finding the people who are ready for them. Somewhere, in rooms lit by other candles, other eyes begin to read Machiavelli's careful words. Some of those eyes belong to rulers, or to men who whisper in rulers' ears. They read him not as a villain, but as a craftsman who has described their world with unsettling clarity. They recognize the traps he names, the choices he recommends. They may not say so in public, but in private they nod, feeling understood. For them, the prince becomes a sort of mirror. In it, they see what they are already doing, what they might do, what they might avoid. They tuck the book away on shelves behind other volumes, a quiet companion to their decisions. Other eyes read the same pages and feel a chill. For churchmen and moralists, Machiavelli's separation of politics from traditional morality is like a crack in a stained glass window. He speaks of religion not as a sacred truth, but as a tool a ruler may use to steady his state. He praises effectiveness over virtue in the old sense. He writes as if salvation belongs not to saints, but to those who survive. To some, this seems bold honesty. To others, it seems like a recipe for disaster, a permission slip for cruelty. The book begins to gather shadows around it. Soon, his name becomes something more than a name. It stretches into an adjective, Machiavellian. It comes to mean cunning, ruthless calculation, the cold use of others as pieces on a board. At dinner tables and in pamphlets, people argue about whether he is teaching princes to be evil or simply revealing what they already are. Some accuse him of corrupting politics by stripping away its idealism. Others claim he has done something strangely honest, dragging into the light what most prefer to leave half hidden.
The Church, disturbed by his unblinking gaze, places his work on lists of forbidden books. The prince must not be read, they say, not by ordinary believers whose souls might be at risk. Of course, the moment something is forbidden, its shape grows more distinct in people's imaginations. Copies continue to circulate, sometimes secretly, passed between scholars, statesmen, and those who were curious about the darker corners of power. A small, practical manual written for a particular time becomes a symbol in a much larger debate about whether politics can ever truly be moral. Centuries turn. The world shifts around the book. Thrones fall, republics rise, empires expand and crumble. New technologies appear, new philosophies, new revolutions. Yet the prince does not vanish. It moves with the times, always finding new readers who see in it reflections of their own age. Some political thinkers read him and shudder, using him as a warning of what happens when leaders care only about survival, not justice. Others read him with a kind of grim respect, seeing him as one of the first to speak about power without disguises. In royal courts and later in presidential palaces, his ideas sometimes appear in softened forms. Advisors tell leaders that they must protect their reputations, manage their image, act decisively when danger threatens. Military strategists echo his warnings about relying on mercenaries. Diplomats speak of interests and necessity, where earlier ages might have spoken only of honor. They may not always mention his name, but his fingerprints can be felt on the language they use. Outside the halls of power, in quieter rooms filled with books, scholars take up his work again and again, turning it in their hands like a stone worn smooth by water. They ask, was he a cynic, laughing at morality from the shadows? Was he a patriot, trying in his own way to wake Italy from its sleep? Was he a teacher of tyrants or a disappointed lover of republics? Some point to his other writings, where he praises citizen armies and participatory government, and suggests that the prince is only one facet of a more complicated soul. Others argue that the sharpness of this small book cannot be softened by anything else he wrote. As centuries pass, the judgments laid on his name pile up like layers of dust and gold. The word Machiavellian is used to insult, to warn, sometimes even to admire a certain cleverness. His life becomes a story told in brief. A failed official, a tortured exile, a man who wrote a dark handbook for rulers. The slow, lonely evenings he spent in Sant'Andrea, talking silently with dead authors and shaping his thoughts by candlelight, are rarely remembered. The ache beneath his cool advice is easy to miss.
And yet, beneath all the arguments about him, his book continues to ask a question that cannot be put to sleep. What happens when we look at power as it truly behaves, not as we wish it would? Can we face that sight without losing our hope completely? Can we learn from it without becoming like the worst of what we see? These questions do not belong only to princes. They belong to anyone who has watched unfairness and wondered why harsh people sometimes rise while gentle ones struggle. They belong to anyone who has ever tried to lead others, even in small ways, and discovered how hard it is to be both good and effective. Some readers find, over time, a kind of strange comfort in Machiavelli. Not comfort in the cruelty he describes, but in his refusal to lie about the world.
They feel that by showing how far people will go to hold power, he is, in his own way, defending those who must live under such rulers. If you know what a leader might do to stay in control, you are less easily surprised, less easily deceived. You can prepare, resist, or at least understand what is happening around you. Knowledge, even when it is hard, can be a shield. Others find their comfort in rejecting him. They read the prince and feel with renewed strength that they want something else from their leaders, more tenderness, more honesty, more true virtue. In pushing against his conclusions, they define their own values more clearly. In this sense, even those who dislike him are still in conversation with him, as if his spirit lingers in the doorway while they argue back. All the while, the man himself lies quiet in his grave, unable to answer his critics or clarify his intentions. The shadow of his little book stretches far beyond what he could have imagined, touching revolutions, reforms, and even the rhythms of modern life. In television shows and novels, characters described as Machiavellian plot and maneuver, adding another layer to his legend. His ideas slip into business schools and management guides, softened and reshaped, but still carrying the old concern. How do you hold on to power in a world that will always try to take it from you?
And here you are, so many years later, lying in your own room, listening to a story about a man who wrote by candlelight in a small house among the hills. The noise of your day is fading. The things you worried about a few hours ago have grown a little softer at the edges. Machiavelli, for tonight, is no longer a figure in a distant history book. He is just a tired human being, once young and hopeful, later bruised and searching, trying to turn his pain and his observation into something that might outlive him. You do not have to agree with him. You do not have to accept his advice. Maybe part of you feels drawn to his clarity, while another part recoils from his coldness. Both reactions are allowed. That tension is where his legacy truly lives, in the space between what he saw and what we wish were true. In that space, something gentle can grow, the realization that even the hardest ideas can be used not as chains, but as mirrors. They can show us what we do not want to become. As this story comes to rest, imagine the candle in his farmhouse at Santa Andrea burning low for the last time. The pages of the prince lie nearby, stacked neatly, quiet and unknowing. Outside, the night presses softly against the windows, just as it does now around yours. The wind moves through the trees, the world goes on. One man's search to understand power becomes just one thread in a vast tapestry of human stories, of attempts to make sense of danger, hope, and the fragile art of living together. You can let his voice fade now if you wish, like footsteps receding down a long corridor. What remains with you does not have to be his harshness. It can be the reminder that every system, every government, every leader is made not of marble and titles, but of human beings, as frightened and as longing as the rest of us. It can be the quiet decision, deep in your own chest, about what kind of power you wish to respect, what kind of person you wish to be when you hold any power at all, no matter how small. The candle goes out. The room where he once sat is dark. The hills outside are still. In your own darkness, you are free to breathe a little more slowly, to let your thoughts drift away from courts and conspiracies and difficult choices. The prince will continue its long journey through other minds, other times. For tonight, it is done enough. You have walked beside its author through the streets of Florence, through the halls of government, into the silence of exile, and out into the long shadow of his ideas. Now you can leave him there, a distant figure in a far-off century, and return gently to your own life, carrying with you only what feels light enough to hold. The rest can stay in the past, where it belongs, as sleep comes softly to take its place.